Probability. This is a digital lesson. It covers theoretical, experimental, and compound probability. All the vocabulary that they're going to see in this lesson are on slide 2. And you want to go over some of these terms with the students. Probability, event, outcome. On the next slide, theoretical probability, experimental probability, and sample space. So once you've gone through all of those with the students, they're going to drag and drop terms into the correct place in these sentence frames. So they just click and hold on the edge, and then they can move these into the correct box. And if they need to refer back to the last 2 slides, they can do that. And then you want to show them the likelihood of an outcome. So certain means it's going to happen for sure, 100%. Impossible, 0%. Right in the middle would be equally likely, so that's a 50-50 chance of something happening. If their likelihood is more than 50%, that would be likely, and less than 50% unlikely. So students are going to use those terms on the next slide. So they're just going to type in either impossible, unlikely, equally likely, unlikely, or certain. So it will happen 100%, that would be certain. So they type it in. Probably not happen would be unlikely, and so on. And then they're given some examples with a number cube. So rolling a number cube with the numbers 1 through 6. If you roll a number under 7, that would be certain. Rolling an even number would be equally likely, and so on. And then we have some different examples here. So the chance of getting heads when you're flipping a coin would be equally likely. Chance of rolling a 5 would be unlikely. And then there's some interesting ones on here too that the students can play around with. Now we're going to explain theoretical probability. So this uses ratios to determine how likely something is to happen. So for example, you have a bag of 20 marbles. There's 6 blue, 4 red, 2 yellow, 5 green, and 3 purple. You're going to take a random sample, which means just choosing by chance, of 1 marble from the bag. So what is the theoretical probability of choosing a red? So it asks the students how many marbles there are total. Well, there's 20, so they're going to type 20. How many marbles are red? 4 are red. And then what's the ratio of red to total? That would be 4 to 20. And they have to simplify that, so it would be 1 to 5. That would be the theoretical probability, 1 out of 5. The next slide has a different one. Again, 20 marbles. This time 5 blue, 3 red, 4 yellow, 2 green, and 6 purple. So if you took a random sample of 1 marble from the bag, what would be the outcome? And they have to make sure they simplify their answer. So the chances of choosing a blue would be 5 out of 20, or simplified to 1 out of 4. And they're going to do the same thing with different colors. This one, chance of choosing a green or yellow, so they have to add those 2 numbers together. Now, experimental probability is a result when you perform an experiment. So here's an example of an experiment where a student chose randomly from a bag of M&Ms. So he chose 10 times, and the bag contained 20 M&Ms. So brown, he chose 1 brown, so it would be 1 out of 20. He chose 2 blue, which would be 2 out of 20, or simplified to 1 out of 10, and so on. And then if you compare the two, well, they're not always going to be exactly the same, but the more you repeat an experiment, the closer it should come to the theoretical probability. And each time you repeat an experiment, that's called a trial. So students are going to do their own experiment on the next slide. They're going to use a number cube. There is a printable number cube that you can cut out and construct if the students need their own die. And then here they're just going to tally. So they're going to roll that number cube 24 times, and they're going to tally the number of times they roll each number. We already have a theoretical probability of 1 out of 6 for every number, but we're going to find out what the experimental probability is. So they're going to roll 24 times, and they're just going to tally, just make tally marks for how many times they choose each one of these, or they roll each one of these numbers. And then they're going to type in the experimental probability. So this one would be 3 out of 24 or 1 out of 8, 1 to 8, and so on. Then we get into compound probability. This is the probability of 2 or more independent events occurring together. So for example, flipping a coin and rolling a number cube. So what's the probability that you'll roll a 5 and flip heads? So what you do is you take the probability of each event and you multiply them times each other. So the probability of rolling a 5 would be 1 out of 6. Probability of flipping heads would be 1 out of 2. You multiply those two together and you get a probability of 1 out of 12. So students are going to do that on the next slide. Here, the probability that you'll roll a 2 or 3 and flip tails. So you find out the probability of each event and then multiply them times each other. Then you're going to get another drag and drop vocabulary. Same thing, you've got sentence frames. Students have to drag these into the correct place in their sentence frame. And then they're offered a challenge at the end. So here's with a deck of playing cards. They have to find a probability of choosing a heart and rolling a 2 on a number cube. So that's a challenge to see if they can figure that out. So that is a digital lesson on probability.